of a service call, an emergency service call. It is Saturday, September 24th. The MIRA walk-in is at 58 degrees, and we have a high temp alarm on the KE2 temp controller. From the looks of it, the coil is not iced up, so I guess we're going to need to start up on the roof. This particular coil has a temperature controller down here that controls a solenoid valve, and there's no electrical communication between the evaporator and the condenser. The condenser just turns on and off via the low pressure control. So if the solenoid valve gets de-energized, the system pumps down, it shuts off, and then if the solenoid valve gets energized, the theory is the refrigerant flows, turns the low pressure control on basically, or turns the system on and it runs. So at this point, if the fans are running, the temperature controller's calling, we would assume that the low pressure control is open. So let's go start up on the roof. All right, up on the roof, this is our beer walk-in condensing unit. I just pulled all the panels off. It is not running, so we're gonna start in the electrical section over here. Forgive this exhaust fan that sounds like it's about to take off. We're actually gonna be installing a new exhaust fan shortly here too. Just got it, received it at my shop. It's a matter of scheduling everything. But back to this guy. So we need to get in here and start with power, okay? Three-phase power comes from the breaker to the top of the contactor. The pressure control, high and low, controls the compressor contactor, which turns the compressor on. So we're gonna start and see if we have three-phase power first. We've got our schematic right here. You know, we could look at it and tell right here that power, it's kind of rough looking. But power comes in on here, goes to the top of the contactor. Then the contactor's coil voltage is controlled by the pressure controls. So if we come over here, we've got a pressure control and we have a contactor. So let's go ahead and test power to the top of our contactor, 210 volts. That's 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 210, okay? And then 2 to 3, 211. So we have three-phase power from the breaker panel being delivered to the top of this contactor, but for some reason the compressor contactor is not pulling in. Now the only things in this system, and again it's going to be hard to see on the schematic, but the only things would be the high pressure control and the low pressure control, okay? So let's go ahead and get that guy installed right there, and then we'll come over here and see. Actually, that's not a good spot for it. I think that's a little bit better. Right there, okay? So let's go ahead and see what, if we measure across this low pressure control, if it's open or closed, okay? All right, so the low pressure control is saying 209 volts, meaning that the low pressure control is open. Whether the system is out of refrigerant or it's simply just pumped down, we don't know. Our next step is going to be that we need to apply service gauges to find out if it's completely void of refrigerant or if we need to look deeper than that. All right, getting ready to put service gauges on this guy, but before I open the core or the valve, you want to actuate the packing nut. And what that does is it actually extends the life of the, I think it's a gland or whatever, inside the packing, whatever they call it. It just basically makes it last a little bit longer. So you should always have those somewhat loose, just a quarter turn or so. And now's the moment of truth. We've got 0 PSI. Where's it leaking from? But, well, there's pressure, so that's a plus, but for some reason I'm leaking. I think my hose gasket's messed up, but that's a plus. It had pressure in it. Yeah, that gasket's pretty messed up. So what I can do temporarily is just pull the 6-inch extension off, because it's a service valve anyway, so we don't really need the low loss per se. So there's that. And then let's try that again. Now, what is going on here? Something is leaking like crazy. I gotta figure this out. All right, this the threads are like messed up. I hate to do this, but I had to grab my Knipex pliers and just tighten a little bit on this nut. So The interesting thing is that this system has refrigerant in it. What is it about this thing right now? Every one of these things is jacked up. Huh. I have a tool for it, but I'm a little lazy right now. Probably shouldn't be doing this. I'll probably get yelled at by everybody for ruining your gauges, but I just torqued down on that a little bit. That's weird though that every valve is doing that. Huh. Even still. Look at that, man. That's odd. It's very odd. Huh. Alright. Well, we have refrigerant pressures. We are equalized out. So why are we open on our low pressure control? What the heck? The low pressure control is open, but we have pressure. So that's probably going to indicate a bad low pressure control is what we got going on here. Let's go verify. All right, so we come over to the low pressure control, and because this is a switch, all that it's doing is breaking power. If we measure voltage across it and we see voltage like that, 210 volts, and that's what the voltage of the system is, that indicates that this pressure control is open, even though it's got the proper pressure. And right now, approximately it's set to cut in at 30 PSI and set to come out or cut out about 8 PSI. So cut in at 30, cut out at about 8, and we've got 150 PSI on the low side, and that guy's open. So this guy is bad. What you can do sometimes, let's see. No, it's not going to actuate. But what we will do actually is go ahead and I'll have to get a different screwdriver, and we'll actuate the pressure control and then pump the system down. Now I know that I have a pressure control in my van. Whether or not it's a standalone low pressure control or a dual pressure control, I don't know yet. But regardless, we're going to be replacing this guy. I have to get it running. So what we're going to do is front seat the king valve on the receiver, okay? Put this cap on because it's also, that's another thing too. When you loosen those glands or the packings, they do leak a little bit of refrigerant. So then what we're going to do is grab this guy, put it right here to where I can see it from the other side. And for some reason I can't do the contactor. It won't, I'm sorry, the low pressure control. It won't let me bypass it like I normally do. So what I'm going to do is actually just push in the contactor, and we're going to pump the system down. So I'm just watching the service gauges, watching the low pressure pump down, so it's stacking all the refrigerant in the receiver and the condenser and not allowing it to go past that king valve that I front seated. And so we're just pumping it down, and then once we get it to shut off on low pressure, or once we get it to where we want it, about 5 to 10 PSI, we'll change the pressure control with the refrigerant still in the system. And I'm pretty sure that one's labeled pressure controls, that I have a low pressure control, but let's get in here and see what we actually have. P70AB2C. Got it. That is a low pressure control. Johnson, I like those. So we're going to do that. We shouldn't need anything else. We will investigate the compressor contactor, but I don't think it's going to be bad. But I mean, you never know with the sand that they get blown around here. But forgive my messy van today. Yeah, let's get up there. So we pumped it down to about 10 PSI. Okay, so we got about 10 PSI in the low side. And it's pretty warm. It's about 100 degrees, 104 degrees, somewhere in there outside. So what we're going to do is just take this off right here. Now it is a hot swap, okay? So there's slight pressure in the system. All that we're going to do is put a cap on it real quick. I turned off the breaker. Now we can change the pressure control, and we'll put some nylog and twist it on right there. And still got positive pressure in the system, so we're good to go. All right, a little bit of nylog, and you put it right above where the flare nut goes, right there, and then spin it. And then I put it all over the threads, and then all that we're going to do is take that off, put that on, and tighten it on, and then we'll get on it with a crescent wrench, and then we'll secure it so it's not going to rub out on the copper or anything like that too. Pressure control is installed, wired back in, and it's adjusted to where it needs to be. So we are still at about 14 psi pumped down. Let's go ahead and open this guy up, and we should start rising. 20 psi, 23, there we go. We kicked on at 28 psi. And we are running now. So I'm gonna keep opening this valve. We'll leave it cracked. That way I can read system pressure. And I'll start assembling the condensing unit, and we're gonna watch the unit kind of run for a bit, make sure everything's okay. So as far as what caused the pressure control to fail, well, first and foremost, these Ronco controls, in my experience, usually don't last more than 10 years without having to be replaced. I think that this guy was installed in 2016, so a little bit shy of 10 years, but I'm not surprised. The pins I tend to see a lot more life out of in my experience, but to each their own if you like those ones better, you know. So we're just gonna start cleaning up. But yeah, I don't really know the cause, it's hard to say. That's why we're gonna watch it operate for a bit. All right, we've been running for about 10 minutes. It's about 110, 115. I'm trying to make this get more accurate temperature. That way it's kinda, I'd say it's about 110. It's getting pretty warm up here. The sight glass is slightly flashing, like just a little bit, and that's not a good sign. So the sight glass is a window into the system at the point at which it's installed, okay? Normally, if this was a conventional system without any head pressure control, like a head pressure control valve, I would say that like every once in a while a bubble in the sight glass is no big deal. But if it's flashing, it's a big deal, okay? Because you want a solid column of liquid going to your expansion valve. Now, when you're working on refrigeration systems like this, you don't really use subcooling, you don't really use superheat as a charging metric. Those are just metrics that you use to gauge how the system is operating, but you don't use them to charge the system. What you need is a clear sight glass, a solid column of liquid going to the expansion valve, and then from that point you can dial in the evaporator superheat, which in turn is going to affect the compressor superheat, okay? But this system has a head pressure control valve. So with that being said, it requires extra refrigerant in low ambient conditions. When it's really hot like it is today, that head pressure control valve bypasses at 180 psi. We're currently at 343 psi, so it is not bypassing. Well, it shouldn't be bypassing, which I don't think it is. But if the sight glass is flashing when it's not bypassing, that means that the system is grossly undercharged, meaning that we probably have a refrigerant leak. More than likely, knowing that we probably have a refrigerant leak, at nighttime, this guy, because it's dropping, even though it's 110 right now, we're getting like 60-degree nights. That system might be turning on and off on low pressure control at nighttime. And there's no lockout. So that might be why the low pressure control failed in the first place. So what we're gonna do first and foremost is put some refrigerant in it. We're gonna get the proper amount of charge in there. Once we do that, then we can evaluate further. I'm gonna have to add some refrigerant to the system, but I need to make sure it doesn't have a giant refrigerant leak, especially on the high side. If the refrigerant leak is on the liquid line after the receiver or on the suction line anywhere, downstairs, whatever, it can be repaired after the fact and I can put refrigerant in the system. There's a possibility that if it's a very small leak that I'm gonna come back to repair it, being that we're on overtime and it's a weekend. So I'm gonna go ahead and add refrigerant. I've got my refrigerant, but before I do that, I need to do a quick leak search up on the roof, okay? Put my leak detector, this is the DR82, put it on turbo mode, and I'm just gonna run around the high side just to make sure that there's no giant leaks. Now I have the tip that'll light up, or I have a display with the numerical readout right here, and I'm just running through the system. I'm not really seeing anything. I don't see any signs of a leak over here. I would expect that if I had a big leak, that it would be, there would be oil everywhere. So I'm looking at the tip. I don't see any red light on it. I know it's hard for you guys to see, but that's the cool thing about this lighted tip is it helps us. So I'm just checking. I'm not seeing anything. I'll run around the front real quick. As long as I don't see anything major right here, Then I'll turn the system back on and we'll proceed with charging it. And then we'll go downstairs and look for a leak down there. So nothing. So I'm gonna run back over here and turn on the breaker. Forgive me, I'm kind of winded here because it's hot. So I'm out in the Coachella Valley. It's the low desert of Southern California. It's extremely hot out here. At my house in the Inland Empire, it's only in the 90s. Out here, it's 110. So I'm not used to this 110 because we haven't had this for about 2 weeks at my house. So we kind of got a little used to the 90-degree weather. So we're back up and running. Now I'm going to add refrigerant. I'm just going to put the maximum amount of refrigerant in the system and fill the receiver up 3/4 of the way. All right, now this particular unit, I left the installation instructions in the unit when I installed it many, many years ago. And it actually has the performance data and the information on how much extra refrigerant to install for the head pressure control valve. So we have an AWA 9490ZXT, and it says for 70 degree lowest ambient 3.9 pounds, 50 degree 4.1, 30 degree 4.2. That's where we're going to go. We're going to go with 30 degrees lowest ambient. So 4.2 pounds of refrigerant after you clear the sight glass is the proper flooded charge for this unit. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on right now. I had pumped it down just to try to check the liquid level, but it's so hot that it's almost impossible to do so. Also, check this out. I got Fieldpiece's new SR47 scale right here with the new wireless handle. It's a new design, sleek design. They increased the weight that you can put on it. I'll flip it over in a minute and it says it. But so far, I've added 2 pounds of gas. We're going to turn it back on, check to see if the sight glass is cleared, and then continue adding the needed refrigerant for the proper flooded charge. So I didn't catch it on camera, but when I originally put my gauges on it and started adding refrigerant, it took about 5 ounces to clear the sight glass. So with that being said, we need to add 4.1-ish pounds on top of the 5 ounces. So let's just call it 2 pounds that I've added to it, right? Because there's the 5 ounces. So we're just going to add another 2 pounds to the system, and then we should have the proper amount of refrigerant for the flooded charge. All right, and we're right at it. We're at 4 pounds, 7.75 ounces. So we're right in there. Get it down here so we can actually see it a little bit better. There we go. So that's doing good. And it's cool that we have this chart right here. So yeah, we're gonna let it run for a minute, make sure everything's good, make sure I can still pump it down at the receiver, and then we'll go downstairs and do a leak search down at the evaporator coil. All right, we are pumping down, but it got close. Head pressure got all the way up to about 410 PSI. And mind you, that's pumped down at the king valve, but the pressure control should be cutting out about 450 PSI. So that's something you need to check when you're adding the flooded charge. If the system was designed properly, it should be able to hold all the refrigerant pumped down in the receiver. But the one thing the manufacturer doesn't know is how long your line set's gonna be. So that's kind of the tricky thing. But yeah, we're about to pump down. So it's at 12 PSI and 400 and dropping. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this back up so we can go ahead and continue running. And then we'll go downstairs, we'll shut off the condensing unit, go downstairs and do a leak search down there. So I'm told, I was talking to the people at Fieldpiece, and they were telling me they designed this scale, and it says it on the back too. 252 pounds is what it can hold now. So yeah, I can step on it as of this week. In a couple weeks, I might be over 250, but not right now. Obviously, you can change the units, you know, do everything you need to do on that. So that's very convenient as usual. Tear button right here. This is the sync button, the power button. And they designed this scale, and there are other scales too, but this one even more so, to be able to handle and be used when it's raining. Let's say you're recovering gas and your tank's overheating in the high ambience. It's designed to have water flooding down on top of it. So what that means is you can have a water hose flowing on your recovery tank, cooling it off, or you can have your recovery tank in an ice bucket, and oftentimes the water will splash over. It's not going to hurt the scale. They also gave you like little handles, which are pretty cool on the side. You know, pretty nice. They did a good job just refining things and changing it up a bit. The same case as they used to have, so that's cool. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So let's go downstairs and see if we can't find a refrigerant leak. All right, we've got the DR82 set up, and check this out. It's already going crazy. This is a really old coil, and it's just picking up stuff left and right. This thing has leaks all over it. This whole thing is trash. Come back here. We're just running on the back. Step over here to the expansion valve section, and let's just go down into here. Look in here. Doesn't seem like it's really picking anything up over here. It's all on the other side. Drain pan, no. TXV is fairly new. I installed it a few years back. I remember doing that job. So, okay. Not picking up anything over here, but we're definitely picking up something over here. Let's go back over here and see if it goes crazy again. Let's see what we get. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just going nuts everywhere. And there's pinholes all along that. The whole thing is just pitted out. It's not anything that I'm gonna repair. We're gonna talk to him about a new coil. So we'll take the specs off this guy. This is a Keep Right coil, so Trenton, same thing. Looks like a 6200 BTU coil. So we'll get all the specs, and we'll get the specs off the condensing unit. And we will talk to the customer about a new evaporator coil, but it's not going to happen right now. So I'll have them create another. It's kind of a confusing thing, but they created a work order for this service call, so I'm going to go ahead and close this one out, and then have them create another work order so I can quote an evaporator coil. When you're dealing with some of these restaurants, it takes so long to get things approved that, like, this is an overtime call, so this one's going to be expensive for me to even come out and get it going. And for them to have to wait 2 months to approve a new coil, like, I need to get my stuff billed out and get paid for it. So yeah, that's a glimpse into the politics of doing chain restaurant work. It's learning how to work the invoicing system so you get paid in an appropriate manner. But I'm going to put this back together. We're going to turn it on, and we'll submit a quote for a new evaporator coil.
Nothing too crazy on this one. They just simply had a beer walk-in that wasn't working right. Now, I've done some work on this system before. We changed a TXV a while back because the packing was leaking, and I didn't have any of the there's like a rebuild kit for it. But anyways, that's a whole nother video. But this time, the evaporator itself has so many refrigerant leaks, and judging by the look of the coil, it's not even something that we're going to try to fix because it's just not worth it. So we are in the process of giving the customer a quote to replace the evaporator coil and possibly the whole system. We'll kind of talk to them about that and see where they want to go with this. Now, we did have a pressure control that had failed. So I went ahead and replaced the pressure control and got the system back up and running. Now, you know, the system itself is older. The condensing unit's not too bad, right? I do like that style of condensing unit, but it would probably be beneficial for the customer to go ahead and replace the condensing unit and the evaporator, convert the system over to 448A, and you know, be done with that one, and then get another, you know, 5 to 10 years out of the system. That's pretty typical on these refrigeration systems nowadays. But as far as the repair goes, there was nothing too crazy. I do want to kind of talk about the whole idea of doing a hot swap, okay? So doing the hot swap, I would argue that there's less refrigerant lost or vented into the atmosphere when you're doing a hot swap than if you were to actually do a recovery and an evacuation. Because when you do an evacuation, the refrigerant vapor that is still in the system is vented to the atmosphere. And if you do a hot swap right and you do it quick enough, it's really not a big deal at all, right? Just boom, boom, knock it out like I did, and it's easy peasy. So nothing too crazy. Now, it is, you know, some people ask, and there is a little bit of potential for non-condensables, air, I guess a tiny bit of moisture to be entered, you know, to get into the system, because when you do the hot swap, whatever's in the capillary of the pressure control itself technically does, you know, it's going to be, you know, absorbed into the system, but it's such a marginal amount that I don't think it's anything that I've ever been too concerned about. I didn't see the need to to do a whole pump down, replace the dryer just to put a pressure control on there when you could just do it really quick, just on the fly. Now you have to have everything ready, have all your tools ready, and it's just a 1, 2, 3, swap it over and be done with it. Okay. So nothing too crazy with this one. I really, really appreciate you making it to the end, as I always say, but I really do. It's awesome. It's very humbling to get all the support from you guys and the views and the comments. And the feedback. I'm always looking to hear feedback. If you guys have better ways, if you have different opinions than how I feel or how I did something in the video, if you have a different way, let me know. I'm always looking to learn and grow. So please share whatever you have. You can either send me an email, hvacrvideos@gmail.com. You can leave a comment, whatever you want to do. Okay. So thank you so very much. And we will catch you on the next one.